Hello, 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 and welcome, family, to another TCR Dialogues. Today, we are talking with the author of the book Black, Quare, and Then to Wear Theories of Justice and Black Sexual Ethics, as well as some of our colleagues and friends and allies across the connection and across educational institutions. So, we are gearing up and preparing for a wonderful conversation that we hope that you all will be able to find useful in your own context. We have with us the Reverend Dr. Jennifer Leath, Professor of Black Religion at Queen's University in Canada, and also the author of Black Queer and Then to Wear. We have with us Reverend Taboho Class, pastor of Robinson Temple AME Church in the 19th Episcopal District. Welcome to you, Reverend Class. We also have with us Dr. Antron Mahoney, professor of African American Studies at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. Dr. Leonard Curry, Assistant Professor of Theology at Xavier University, and our good friend Dee out of Mesuru, Lesotho. So, welcome, welcome, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
I'll start with some open questions for you all about the book, and then I will leave space for you all to ask some questions. So, firstly, I want to know, for you all who read the book, what did you find most interesting, most compelling? What worked well for you in the book?
Well, I'll start off here. It says what jumps out and what I found to be most compelling is just the fact that Dr. Leaf decided to engage vindicationist literature here within this kind of Black, queer, and womanist praxis. I just found that to be amazing. As someone who earned their PhD in Pan African Studies. And my own work focuses on Black queer studies and queer of color critique. Vindicationist literature is not something that I engage with that often. And Dr. Lee outlines why that is so eloquently in this book about, just the often homophobic and misogynistic tendencies within that kind of literary genre and within that kind of theoretical context. And so just the way that Dr. Leath has been able to reframe, reimagine, restore this area of literature that includes things like Afrocentricity and Egyptology and all of these areas that in some ways, have been kind of forbidden fruit in some ways when it comes to thinking about progressive or radical ways to think about Black gender and sexuality. And so I think that's just what jumps out for me of just the way that Dr. Leaf, you were able to just really thoroughly explore that literature and kind of reclaim it. And I think there's a point where you says that, oftentimes scholars, I guess like myself, this is a kind of missed opportunity that we don't engage this literature more often. And so, yeah, that's what stands out for me. And also probably my question for you too is that what made you decide to engage this paradigm and this literature when it comes to vindicationist literature and paradigm? Yeah, I mean, there's many paradigms that you could have went with. I think to articulate the message that you were articulating around how we might think about justice. But yeah, I don't know if that's a question you will ask now or maybe later. But I am so curious about what made you decide to take this road that is often less traveled within kind of womanist and Black queer spaces.
Yes, I thought that I'd also want to jump in here. I found it very compelling, given that I personally, uh, uh, one, is living in a space in which um, uh, the narrative of um, LGBTI people being an African, um, and the resistance to the um, pursuit of justice, especially equality, that the framing of this book is in the first instance. Uh, I think taking the African philosophies and particularly looking at the Egyptology as a basis of reflection and engagement. I mean, the fact that not only is it about the Afro diasporic, but it is always saying and beyond, which would therefore, for me, I find it compelling because it opens an opportunity for even us on the continent to be able to feed ourselves in terms of the reclamation that Dr. Leath is engaged with, so that we do not only see the text as only appropriate for people across the Atlantic Sea, but even for ourselves to begin to engage with and to rediscover ourselves in our counter narrative of an appreciation that our philosophies are enabling for us to pursue justice in the manner that she's raising the concerns and questions that are inside the book. And so that for me made me basically jump, because it also challenges me in the context of being on the shores of the continent.
I'll get in briefly, and then I know that there's a question that has been posed for Dr. Leath to answer. But briefly, I just wanted to say that I was really excited about just the whole project. I know that that sounds simple, but what I mean is that Black queer folk, as you name eloquently in the text, are often erased as an ethical particularity, um, and so sometimes we're just left as unthought, right? We're remarked upon, like, oh, look at him, look at her, look at them, right? But in terms of actually being thought, in terms of people actually marshaling considerable intellectual, moral, spiritual resources to consider our uh, moral, spiritual, theological positions, a lot of folks don't do that work. So this book, it raises a flag, it stakes a claim. It says that no, Quare is worthy of thought, and Quare can have a discourse that is worthy of its name. And so I was just really, really grateful for that work, excited for that work in this text.
Uh, as a gender nonconformist, somebody coming from Southern Africa, from a very small country, I think what was interesting for me was the Marshall principle that she used, and because somehow it helps us reconfigure the black sexual ethics that we provide in the work that we do for when we are advocating for the inclusivity um, on the religious spaces and cultural spaces. So for me, that was very outstanding, and it really validates the complexity of my identity, and that I'm not crazy at all. And sometimes we have to reconsider or reconfigure whatever that we've been thinking religiously. So that was super for me.
I love that. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll leave space for you to respond to the question that Dr. Mahoney asked in the beginning, and then I'll move to the next question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney, and to each of you, thank you so much for engaging this work, and Reverend Brooks for facilitating this conversation today. It's really an honor, and just to respond to this initial question about why the vindicationist start, um, most importantly, um, it comes out of a deep Pan-African commitment and a belief that for us to be able to really uh, achieve and become all that we are meant to become, and to lean into the fullness of our potential, but also of our human dignity, that we need to recognize not only who we are, but to reflect ourselves to one another. And and vindicationism is one of the ways that we do this. I was talking with someone uh, the other day, and she said to me, um, I, I just don't believe that human beings built the pyramids. It had to have been aliens. And this was someone who was not a person of African descent. And it struck me that that the assumption was that this was too great a feat for human beings to have done. And because human beings have not been able to do it since, it could not have been human beings. And indeed, we know that this was people of African descent. And so part of this is a project that is to reclaim also the blackness of Egypt, and or of Kemet. To reclaim the fact of not only the brilliance of the continent and what flows through and from it, um, but also to signal the ways that um, Egypt is North Africa, and is the place of deposit, the Delta Nile deposit of a wealth of knowledge and resources and insights that were flowing from the South and from the West into this space, and making these philosophical and material achievements possible. And so um, this reclamation is about and what I call vindicationism is about a dignity that is often dismissed and erased, and goes unacknowledged and unrecognized, because of legacies like the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. But also, I reclaim these and wrest them really from the hands of cis heteropatriarchal um, uh, analysis and contributors, because of the ways that ancient Egypt also reflected a kind of creativity with respect to gender and sexuality questions. And not all of it is to be adopted or affirmed, but it does reflect um, a way of social organization, and also organization of our relationships, how we regard one another and how we engage one another, that push our human story further, and help us also to understand, I think, better who we are beyond an anthropomorphic understanding. So who we are also in relation to other beings, as we look at the kinds of beings that are signaled in ancient Egypt and reflected in the literature and drawn texts. But I would finally say that this is essential. The crawling back in Charles Long's terms, or the retreat to, or the reclamation of ancient Egypt is essential because it also helps us to remember in these earliest formulations of justice or of a sense of equity or what is right or what is good or what is morally true, in these earliest iterations and writings on the subject, we are reminded that justice requires deep study and praxis, and that it is the sort of thing that we have to be constantly engaged in with all of our being. And so as Dr. Curry has also signaled, like this is a an indicator that we are not just a point of reference, but actually a source and a resource for thinking. And I appreciate Reverend Kloss also, the ways that you perceive this philosophical value and virtue in the African philosophical tradition. And yes, it's a resource for the mashup principle, if you will, that reflects not only the complexity but also the creativity, I think, of who we are. And I hope that the text speaks to a fuller sense of who we can also be together.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for helping us to get oriented to the text. I think that's going to be that insight into your theology and how you came to penning the text in the way that you did will be critical for us in understanding the text. And so when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to start defining some of these terms and defining the text in a way that helps us to translate what's happening in this dialogue to those who are listening. So for now, we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, Washington for CIO.
I am the Reverend
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, family. So we're talking about the book Black, Quare, and Then to Wear: Theories of Justice and Black Sexual Ethics. For those who have not read the book and those who may be unfamiliar with the term, if just a couple of you could talk about what does queer mean to you? Define the word queer from your own perspective.
I'll hop in quickly, but I feel like Jennifer's on the call, so she could take this up easily and move us forward. And is it Dr. Mahoney or Mahone? I know that you mentioned that this is your area of study as well. The queer is a term from E. Patrick Johnson, that he gets from his grandmother. So it's his black grandmother, her way of saying queer, right? Her black Southern woman way of saying queer was to say quare. And as far as I understand, Jennifer taking it up, Dr. Leath taking it up. She's adopting queer in a similar way, or in the same way that one might adopt womanist in the theological academy or in the academy right now, as both a marker of identity, but also a kind of praxis, like a way that you're going to do your scholarship, a way that you're going to be in the world, right? So similar to the definition that Alice Walker set up in the 80s, E. Patrick Johnson defines queer as Black queer, but also, you know, someone who feels, right? And it's similar to Alice Walker's saying that, you know, a woman is just someone who loves roundness or loves the moon or loves love. So that's my loose general definition for queer, right? Other people can fill it out, give it more specificity. I'll have to say that I grew up in the academy at a time where most of my people were not saying queer. I think that Dr. Leath was the first person I heard to say queer, to use that term, both scholarly and in terms of identification. And in my communities, even with Black LGBTQ persons, I don't hear people saying queer very often. However, I did have a chance to use this text in my queer theory course this spring, and several of my students really liked the distinction that they were able to make, that queer allowed them to make as Black queer people, and different from, you know, maybe white queer folks or queer of other color and ethnic background. So I'll stop there because I know other folk can really get into defining queer.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think you did that beautifully. Only thing I would add is I think, and it's important here because I think it bridges from E. Patrick Johnson to what Dr. Leath has done in this text, is that, you know, E. Patrick Johnson develops queer theory through a critique of traditional queer theory, which has been, from its conception, been rooted in more Eurocentric or white perspectives when it comes to studying and analyzing, you know, LGBTQ politics. And so E. Patrick Johnson, you know, really points out kind of a lot of the misreadings when you try to apply this kind of queer theory, Queer, to people of African descent without you really considering the context of race and class and geography within that context. And so E. Patrick Johnson develops queer theory with that being the backdrop. But he also points out that a part of the praxis of queer is that we must also apply queer theory in our Black homes, right? And so E. Patrick Johnson is building on Bell Hooks and other Black feminists and womanist scholars, when he's like, not only should we critique dominant culture and dominant paradigms through this kind of queer lens, but we also need to make sure that we apply that pressure in our own home spaces, whether that is our domestic homes or our churches or our fraternities and sororities, right? All of these kind of Black spaces that we consider to be homes, because that critique also needs to be rendered there. And I think that is something, as I was listening to Dr. Leath, you know, talk about why they decided to go with vindicationist literature and use that as the paradigm to think about justice from this womanist and queer space. I think you are definitely falling in that tradition of how do we also use queer theory in our own home places so that, you know, Black queer folks like myself can feel like we have a place, you know, that we authentically belong and help to co-produce and create these home spaces, because oftentimes we are made to feel like we are a guest in our own houses. And so I think queer theory is about reclaiming these places as our own very homes.
Thank you for sharing with us and adding some texture to the conversation. I want to open up this question again to everyone to tell us a little bit about your context and how you are using this book in your context. Dr. Mahoney, you kind of started to touch on that a little bit. And so I want to hear from others as well. Tell us about your context and how you can use this book in your context.
Well, I was looking at D moving. So
I have my notes, so I'm trying to. You can go first. I'll come after you.
yeah, no. Thank you so very kindly. I have, I think, in a way, indicated that we are in a context in which one of the major challenges is, whilst in terms of the political history of the continent and liberation from colonialism, one of the major challenges that I think we continue to live with is, even though liberation is what we got, but the fact that liberation is a struggle that that touches many other areas, would therefore require of us to engage in the various areas, and among them is about the issue of dignity, humanity, and equality of LGBTI people. Also, not only about just that, but continuing to deconstruct the coloniality that actually continues to thrive, because the teachings that were left by colonial powers remain very strong in terms of how our hermeneutics is informed. We may politically say appropriate things, but socially not necessarily be hitting at the point. And this is about the matter around the human dignity of queer and LGBTI people in this continent. And so, for me, the book is something through which an engagement to continue to expose the legacy of coloniality, or of colonialism, in terms of how gender identity and sexual orientation in our part of the world is treated. As I just want perhaps emphasize in saying, I mean, the white evangelicals that are seemingly moving with such speed to come around is coming to cement that colonial teaching, and that they have left and they're finding ground over here. And so this becomes a resource, more especially because it is written also by someone who is Black and who is unashamedly so, as well as unashamedly a queer person, that we continue to engage around some of these as we engage with people. And the more perhaps we keep on citing some of these writings that keep on reminding us that, in fact, we've got to be liberated from the colonial hermeneutics that has gained so much ground among us, is perhaps this is therefore the reason why this resource and text is important for that purpose. And one is intending to use it in small groups of people as I engage both in the congregation and other spaces where I am, to be able to engage with the text.
Okay. I think the engagement in my context, it's much, I can use this, it resonate with me a lot because of the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexual orientation, like Reverend Class is saying. The engagement, because now in Southern Africa, there's much that we're doing in seeking, affirming, and empowering LGBTI for dialogue with the religious leaders and different stakeholders, much into talking about the inclusivity in churches, not only inclusivity and acceptance, but also participation in churches. And sometimes it's something that we don't even want to talk about because they want to separate religion and culture. But at the end of the day, when they do all the laws, they also go back to culture. So the book is a good resource for us, for them to see the intersectionality of the two, and also how best as the church they can use to see that being Black or being queer or being different from other society as they claim as we are different. It's possible for God to love all of us. So I think it's a good resource for us as now I'm much into dialogues, different denominations in Lesotho, and it's kind of good because it's written by somebody from church, not necessarily from an individual, because now in my context, you cannot be gay and be spiritual. You have to choose between the two. But now when you print the resource like this one and say, this is written by somebody who's pastor, reverend, and this is what she's saying, and she's using the measurement principles and the principles that we know. It's kind of helpful for us, and it's good for the work that we're doing. Thank you.
You're muted.
Yeah, unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, Dee, for your response, and Reverend Class. We are going to cut to one more commercial break to hear from our sponsor, Lawrence for Bishop. And when we come back from our commercial break, we want to hear from all of you. What questions or concerns do you have for the author? That's for our panelists to ask to our author, but also for those of you who are watching online, feel free to drop a question in the comment section so that we can get back to it at a later time or share them with the author for further dialogues in the future. So for now, we'll hear from Lawrence for Bishop.
Hello, my name is Keith Donaldson David Lawrence. I'm the pastor of First AME Church, Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also the director of doctoral studies at Payne Theological Seminary. I was born in the beautiful sunny island of Trinidad where God lives. I am your global candidate. And you ask, what is a global candidate? A global candidate is any candidate born outside the continental United States. And in the history of our church, the 207-year history, 93% of the bishops elected and consecrated were born in the United States. 7% were born outside. And I am saying that it is time for us to elect this global candidate, Keith Lawrence. Why? Because Keith Lawrence will educate, Keith Lawrence will encourage, Keith Lawrence will empower. The last time a bishop was elected from my district, the 16th district, was 1972 in the person of Frederick Hilborn Talbot. So it's time for us to go to the 16th district, elect Keith Donaldson David Lawrence, candidate for Bishop 2024. God bless you. God keep you. Lead with Lawrence.
Welcome back, family. As was stated before the break, I'm going to leave this space open for our panelists to ask questions to the author. What questions or concerns do you have about the book for the author?
Okay, I've been dying to ask this. um, so I think they confused us. Okay, all right, there we go. Dr. Leath, this book is queer, it's womanist, it's vindicationist with an emphasis on Mott. It's theories of justice and a discourse in Black sexual ethics. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, why so many threads? Why so many strands? I mean, this is a book where, readers who are to come, set aside some time. You're going to have to sit with this book. You're going to have to attune yourself to it, and give it some attention. So why so many strands? I know also that you're working with the discourses of intersectionality and Hortense Spillers as interstices. And so for people who aren't all in the academy, most of us have heard of intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw, where it's in all of our political movements now. Our work needs to be intersectional. Don't just try to solve for a single issue, but if you're thinking about race, also consider class and gender. Or if you're thinking about ability, also consider sexual orientation and maybe geography, right? So I'm just curious, Dr. Leath, if you could talk about why your book is so dense. It requires so much time and attention and attunement. And I'm curious, why did you write it that way? Can you talk to us about your writing strategies?
You're muted.
Mood.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this question. And it was not written in this way just to be a challenge to the mind and the patience of the reader, but um, we tend to think of uh, ideas and fields of knowledge in silos and categories that keep us from not only a fuller sense of truth and a fuller sense of knowledge and understanding, but also um, keep us from what I what I think of as the more pluriversal projects to which we are invited as living beings. So when Katie Cannon talks about doing the work our souls must have, and this spread of the erons, the eronic, if you will, that happens when we are doing the work our souls must have, that is a uh, a physical, in the scientific sense, happening in the same way that it is also of the erotic, and so has a sexual component without necessarily being itself sex, and two is rooted in a conceptualization of culture and race and ethnicity. Also is tapping into what it is to be gendered or not, and to think about the political. These are among the terms that are being put into a kind of moving constellation with one another through this text. And so the reason for all of this is that um, it becomes an invitation, and it is in order to make an invitation to think more big picture about who we are in this world and who we are together. When we are only reading the Bible, but not reading some of the source material of the Bible in the ancient Egyptian text and reading it as such. And then when we're reading that, but not reading it alongside the scientific knowledge and information that would have been part of the original mystery schools, as they were so called, in translation in ancient Egypt, where there are constantly layering these different types of knowledge, because you can't understand one well without the other. And so while there are plenty of areas where there needs to be a further calibration and a further treatment, at the same time, these are things that I believe must be looked at together.
I think for me, I know you might not know much into the African context, but my interest is in how do you see the Martian principle specifically addressing the intersectionality or intersectional challenges of LGBTI in Africa, in African context?
So thank you so much for this question. The what I find intriguing, and part of the appeal of Ma'at, is that for a scholar like Maulana Karenga, who I have a deep critique of, but him and other Pan-African scholars, Ma'at becomes the touch point, the signal, the critical, crucial netter of ancient Egypt, and also is connected with Nubian Nubian culture as well, in a very particular way, having a lot of history and appeal in in the uh, times and aspects of ancient Egypt that we're drawing from, and most explicitly drawing from, a richer and fuller, and I would say darker reality and idea of what Africa is, and we could say a whole lot about what it is and what it ain't. And
Yeah,
of course, within one place, right, there are hundreds of tribes within one misdrawn mapped area that is drawn as
yeah,
such because of the colonial legacy. You got however many tribes, and yet Ma'at is valuable because Ma is ours in a different way, and I think we can claim the her and the principles associated with her, and understand morality in some of the ways that she has and does in a different way, and so to me, I think that there's a gift for LGBTQ people who are on the continent and saying, "Look, um, we've heard what evangelical nationalist Christianity has brought.
yeah,
We've seen
yeah,
what Europe has brought. We've seen what the Americas are bringing, and we need to go back to some other spaces, some
yeah,
spaces where we could be reconnected with a broader community, and reconnected in new ways that are not built on the same kinds of hierarchical principles, which is why politics is such an important part of this book too, because even while Ma'at evolved and developed and flourished in what became a quite hierarchical system, and might be described elsewise as well, but oligarchic also. It in its reclaiming, and in our reclaiming of it, we are able to write what I would call, as a counter narrative, a new terra story, a land story. And the new terra story is one that that can claim and reclaim and reform and reshape democratic principles in ways that even push back against those who are so-called democratic folks. But that's the idea. And I would just want to say, Dee, also, and this is an acknowledgement to something that Reverend Klaus said earlier as well. You know, this text, I have to acknowledge, is still quite not only North American centric, but it comes out of a sense of Blackness that is very much steeped in a United States orientation, and
Yeah.
so one of the things that I am acknowledging, and hope is acknowledged and need to acknowledge even more through and beyond the text, is that colonialism is always shifting, and colonialism is always infecting, and none of us are immune. And so we all have to recognize the shifts of colonialism, because there was a
Yeah.
time when colonialism was exacted on our bodies through things like gay rape, right?
Yeah.
But now it's convenient for um, for uh, for heterosexuality to be presented
Yeah.
as a new form of ideological warfare, I think, really, and at the expense of the erasure of what I'm sure you know even better than I do, in terms of more ancient and historic cultural
Yeah.
experiences and expressions of homosexualities in your context.
Yeah.
um, and so, I think all of us need to be on alert and aware and active in terms of that work. And so, to me, is a way that um, we can begin to retrieve, but we can't adopt it wholesale, and that's like anything. And so, I think it also requires a rethinking of how we think about objectivity and relativism.
Yeah.
Well, your response to that question made me think about a question that I have for you. In this text, I mean, you clearly indicate that you're kind of working within the wheel of vindicationist literature with this kind of womanist and queer praxis. And I think you, like I said, you just articulated that, you're trying to converge these paradigms that oftentimes work in isolation, which made me think about, and this is something I was thinking about as I was reading the book too, was that in what ways do you see kind of this vindicationist literature, how it could help to expand these paradigms of womanist paradigm or queer paradigms? And I think even just now you're, thinking about this within the context of the African continent. I was thinking like, oh, that's one way that you could definitely use kind of or employ kind of vindicationist paradigms, or more Afrocentric paradigms, maybe to expand how we might think about black queer studies or womanist theology or paradigms. And so I would love to hear, in what ways have you been thinking about other ways that vindicationist literature or theory could be applied outside of that context, outside of that world, to help expand these other two paradigms that you again take up in such complex and eloquent ways?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney. And this is just really a question for which I'm grateful in that it reminds us, most importantly, that theory is never meant to sit in a text, in a book. But if theory is worth anything, it should be something that can be practiced, something that can be lived um, a, for a constructive or to a constructive end. And for me, that end is building new worlds, building new just worlds. And so how do we do that? Well, okay, again, I'm going to turn to that forerunner in terms of vindicationism in Malana Karenga, and give just a little bit more space here, because there's a great example, which is um, the the ritualistic elements of what he has been about, because of course, you know, his work is not just is not just limited to the theoretical aspects of what he is doing, but he, you know, then applies these Kiswahili principles, right, to the celebration of Kwanzaa, and Kwanzaa is a an example of how he takes Kiswahili, intentionally a Pan-Africanist language, uh, and the principles associated with this East African Pan-African language, um, and, and situates it with principles uh, that are not only rooted in an East African context, but also are drawing from the deep research that he's done on Maat and the principles that are consistent from that tradition. In a lot of womanist work, we are drawing on West Africa and West African principles. And I just want to give a shout out to Sabon Fusome's work, and acknowledge what comes out through Burkina Faso, and also in a very early way, is reminding us also of the ways that there are homosexualities within early Burkina Faso traditions and cultures as well. Um, but but that is to say uh, that one of the things that we, I think, ought to be doing with vindicationist ideas and literatures is um, is is reminding ourselves of how many retentions we do in fact have, those of us who are in diaspora, and those of us who are in and on the continent, making sure that that we don't forget the words and the stories of the griots, that we don't forget the words and the stories of our ancestors, and the traditions and the rituals that keep us together. And so, what I perceive is, in this move from um, a, a, if you will, a womanism to a queerness, although there is a queerness in womanism and a womanism in queerness already.
Yeah.
There is this way that um, that instead of just uh, I'm going to Canada and I'm taking, you know, whoever else wants to be free with me, right?
Mhm.
In this kind of material sense. Beyond that, there is the I'm going to act up wherever I am, recognizing that struggle is a part of life.
Mhm.
And the quest for
Mhm.
justice is something that has to be constantly maintained. And then how do we understand that in in ritualized forms? And again, we can't wholesale adopt everything that that some um, uh, what have been pejoratively at times termed the hotepis
Mhm. Yeah.
have adopted. But for certain, we can acknowledge where, for those who are in Christian traditions, where we are indebted to ancient Egypt, right?
Mhm.
For sure, we can do that. For sure, we can also acknowledge some of the ways that our own rituals and culture are informed also by that part of who we are. It's more than a DNA test.
Mm.
It's more than a genetic trace. It
Yes.
is it is a saying that we are happy to belong together and to do the work that our souls must have for the building up of new worlds that are constantly prepared to combat injustice, constantly prepared to establish and reestablish the integrity of this planet that includes human beings,
Mhm.
and uh, is not limited to that. So in terms of what vindication give us, I think it's in part also beyond the theory, some ritualistic options.
Thank you. Yeah.
There
Brenna.
is
Oh,
some. Oh, yes. I really read, and I don't know why in my reading I always have to look for some things. I do want you to help us, for any person who's going to read this, that whenever you are writing in relation to black, and white, um, notably, I realized that uh, you always capitalize black, but not so with white. Is it something that anybody needs to learn about that? Anybody should be learning anything about what informs you to write in that manner? Because yeah, because I've noted something to that effect as I was reading throughout the chapters of this book, that whenever you had to mention something about whiteness, about the identity of being white, it's never capitalized. Do you want to share anything about that?
Thank you for this question, and I wish I could just blame it on the editors, but I think that would not be um, that would not be uh, truly reflective of what it is. I appreciate this question, and I anyone who knows me well knows that I struggle a lot and play a lot with capitalizations and what they signal, what they signify, what they mean, what they don't mean, and even as you can see with my name, for instance, how it is or is not, and there is a way that I think, um, in the quest for justice, sometimes we think we are moving toward a space of equity when we have not yet attained equality. And I think we don't always recognize how the path, or recognize the path clearly to get to equity, um, and what it requires. Um, and so I'll give an example. I mean, and this is a this is, I think, the kind of debate that is at play in discussions around reparations too. But there is a way that um, if you're uh, if you are at -1 and you are dealing with someone who's at 1, um, you don't add 1 to the -1 for equity. And even really, if you add 1 and then subtract 1 from the one who's at 1, that doesn't necessarily bring equity. Sometimes you have to add 2 to the one who's at -1 in order to get 1 and 1. um, and you know, um, maybe this was my math in terms of the language, for now and not for always, but also there are ways that blackness is signaling different things than whiteness is. Um, whereas um, whereas there are ways that blackness can be um, associated with space and place, and there are ways that blackness is a very specific result of the stripping of people of their knowledge of space and place. um, there is a luxury and an inequality even in the term whiteness, in the sense that white folks, for the most part, many could, if they so chose, figure out where they came from, where they came from in a way that is not as destabilized, or destabilized in the same ways that the separations of families and cultures and peoples exacted through the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism did. Now, of course, there are sufferings and detachments of people from their place and their location, even among people who associate with this term white. But the term is it's an unequal term because of an unequal formation already. And two, in terms of what the project is about, in terms of achieving a kind of equity and justice, there is a recognition that what might appear to be the obvious addition or the obvious subtraction is not always what actually brings us into a new equilibrium of justice. And I do refer to justices with the understanding that there are multiple, and that they are moving, and that they are ongoing, and that they are things that we have to continue to seek. And so, um, just as each of us, as far as it pertains to our earthly sojourn, none of this is permanent. But I hope that helps to answer the question in terms of how I'm thinking about it. And of course, too, just I think all of us ought to be rethinking our hierarchy, our that what we are adopting in terms of hierarchies when we use language, and with what we're doing in the capitalizations that we make.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
All right, family, we're going to take one more break to hear from another of our sponsors, Tyler, for Historiographer.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test.
I'm Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, Senior Pastor of Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the cradle of African Methodism, and I'm looking for your vote to be the next historiographer of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. At Mother Bethel, we recently received a $90,000 grant to preserve our windows, those beautiful stained glass windows. If elected historiographer, I'll bring those same skills to the office and help other churches learn how to leverage their historical story to get preservation dollars. We also have been busy about the promotion of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. You know my work. I've produced multiple documentaries on the history of our church, and it's time now for a motion picture of the global AME story. This is the Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, seeking your vote as the next historiographer of the AME Church. Let's not miss our opportunity.
All right, welcome back for the last time in this segment. I want to hear from those who are on the panel. What further resources are you all using to supplement this book as is necessary in your context? If people are looking to tackle Black, queer, and then to where, but they need some help understanding the text, what supplementary resources would you all recommend?
I want to recommend Dr. Mahoney go first.
Oh my God, that was a good setup because I was so excited to hear what you were going to say. I think about this text, particularly in my context as a African American studies professor. Um, when I first read this book, I was thinking, I wish I had this text when I was, um, starting out on my PhD journey in a Pan African Studies program, because it complements. We've talked about this a lot, but it complements uh, any type of vindicationist literature that you may be reading, or or reading or sharing or viewing. I think that this is definitely a necessary text to go along with all of those other kind of historical, texts and authors who have become kind of iconic in that world of vindicationist, Afrocentric, Egyptologists, Kemet scholars, whatever the name may be. I think that this text should go along with any of those type of readings because of the interpretation and reimagining of that word, and also the centering of, again, womanist and Black queer praxis, that says that that we have an experience, an embodied experience, a knowledge that supplements this in real tangible ways, if we're going to really think about justice. And so that's one way that I'm thinking about it. I also think it obviously goes hand in hand with any other type of readings or work within womanism or Black queer studies, because again, I think it also pushes those areas to go into terrain, and theoretical ways of being that we don't typically go into. And so I think it definitely supplements that. But then also, I'm thinking about the political and the politics here. Oftentimes when we think about Black politics, and particularly any Black politics that has any type of religious framework or context, I think that this book is also very necessary in those contexts, or any type of political organizing or ways to think about Black politics, and thinking about who we build solidarity with, who we build coalitions with, because oftentimes within Black politics, it's the Black queer folks, the Black LGBT folks that we see kind of our mainstream organizations like the Black church and the Black and mainstream Black political organizations. You see it's usually around Black queer issues, Black LGBT issues, that they make compromises with, I would say, organizations that are not always to our benefit, right? And I think this book does, as many others, do a great job of raising some questions before we go down those paths. And so I'm also thinking about how this might be used in various kind of political contexts, and to think about political organizing, particularly within any type of religious framework or context.
I think for me, it goes with the contextual theology, the queer theology. I think what do you call this? The theologians, when they did the queer theology, I think the material that the supplement that can go well with this book is that the contextual theology. Also, because it talks much into the integration of cultural and spiritual and religious practices with LGBTI. And also, the second thing that we can use in supplement of the book, I think, is the local LGBTI stories, the personal stories and experiences of LGBTI. Can be a very useful tool for us to use to supplement the book in our context. Thank you so much.
I'll add briefly, of course, the foundational text of Alice Walker's definition of womanism, and obviously E. Patrick Johnson's definition of queer. Emily Townsend's work is really important to Dr. Leath in this text. And so, if you could read Womanist Ethics in the Cultural Production of Evil by Emily M. Towns, you would do yourself a big benefit. I don't want us to forget Dr. Leath's emphasis on physics, and in particular, The Disordered Cosmos by Shonda Prescott Weinstein. This book shows up in Dr. Leath's book. And because Dr. Leath is doing a bit with Afrofuturism, uh, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown is just a text that you might want to familiarize yourself with to get a handle on this text. But I mean, again, this book is so interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary and like provoking the creation or the destabilization of genre and perhaps the generation new genre that you can pull this book apart into many spectra of spectra, and go down a lot of paths. I didn't even touch on justices, right?
Yes. Well, one of my is now an old man. Alan Busak has been, I think, uh, one of the persons who has been inspiring me around the issues of justice. I mean, from the time, whatever text you read about in terms of how he has been able to deal with the issue of justice as indivisible, right at the time when he came into the arena within the context of South Africa, and how he's able to actually apply his ethics in relation to global politics and all of that. I found I found that this could be something you could read, Jennifer, and be able to also perhaps at a conversational level of critique. The identities are not the same, but the commitment to engaging with justice, I found that very, very useful. Professor uh, Busak, Alan Busak, I found, throughout the chapters that it may be very, very, very useful, not necessarily dealing with that. At least the other thing I know is his sensibilities as an ally who appreciates the fact that the struggles have to be waged together. And so I would really recommend something like a resource to read this together, to read Dr. Leeds as well as Dr. Pusak on the subject concerning justice. That for me is a very useful, and I do agree with Dee that stories of people, particularly LGBTI people, are very important to be read in order to interact with the principle spirituality that this book is actually dealing with, and perhaps will answer the entire issue of African relevance when LGBTI people on the continent also begin to speak, because they can help us read. They become a resource to read this book together with their lived experiences.
Thank you all for sharing. I will leave the last words before we close to the author, Reverend Dr. Jennifer S. Leath.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for engaging this book, but also for the resources that you have. Um, offered as supplements to me and to others. And I just want to pull back and do a callback, if you will, to part one of this conversation, and to just invite us to the spiritual work of prayer. And it may seem like an odd um, uh, retreat or callback. It might seem like a strange place to which we should crawl back together. But um, this text being an invitation for us to um, build worlds of justice, requires that we do the work, not only the work that our souls must have, but the work that um, is centered and centering, where we are hearing and offering the fullness of ourselves to the being that created us and called us into existence. And uh, the resource that I would um, leave us with, and and it is a type that I use a lot in the text, and that is in the form of questions, um, and invite us to ask ourselves in a prayerful way, and to ask one another, uh, do we seek solidarity with one another truly? And if so, what are we willing to do to be in solidarity with one another, recognizing that um, what we hope for in terms of um, the fullness of our dignity and the dignity of all creation, what we hope for in terms of what we say when we say, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, what we hope for in terms of um, pluriverses that reflect how great, how awesome the divine is, and how great um, a common uh, purpose, but also a common being or ontos or ontology into which we're called. Um, uh, when we recognize all this, when we recognize the greatness of all this, when we say we hope for all these things, we must recognize that there's work to be done, and justice is work, and requires working and working through and working on, and even working uh, to fix those things that we did not break, and deciding together that we are better together, and that even in the midst of all of our differences, that we have something to reach for together. And so whether it's the physics text or the justice text or the race text or the sexuality text, um, or the other kinds of cultural texts that become the place where each of us digs in. We just need to dig deeper so that we can be together. And my prayer is that prayer is one of the ways that we reach that together. Thank you.
All right, family. So you all have heard from all of these folks. I hope that something has been shared that you all can take back to your context, that you all can use in your context, and that you all found personally useful. So thank you to the author, and thank you for all of you who have shared your experiences both with the text and outside of it. To those of you who have been listening in, we appreciate you and look forward to you joining with us again for any future TCR dialogues. Until then, peace, family.
Thank you.
Peace.